Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, your guide to traveling, investing, and living beyond borders, where we talk about living the life that you want to live, where you want to live it. From beautiful San Miguel de Allende, smack in the middle of Mexico, with your hosts, Jonathan Lockwood and James Guzman.
Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders, a weekly stop down for those of you who, like us, believe if there's a better life for you, why on earth would you not try to find it? If that means relocating, good. Quitting your soul-sucking job, great. Creating a location-independent income, giddy up. My name is Jonathan Lockwood. I am here with James Guzman, who's coming to us again from Chile. Hey, James.
Hey, how's it going?
Going good. How's it going there?
Yeah, it's going very well. Nothing too out of the ordinary this week, but just seeing what's going on here in Chile. And there's a pretty cool co-working space down here, and they have a lot of different projects over here in Viña del Mar that I've been checking out. So lots of interesting things going on here. Yeah,
well, boy, I tell you what, our interview with Skinner Lane was really great. I really appreciated some of his perspectives, I hate to say it was better than I imagined it to be, but he was really great. I really appreciated his insights,
Yeah, he's a very well-spoken, well-read guy, and I definitely he's right on board with a lot of my kind of mentality and a lot of stuff that we talk here on the podcast. So
wait a minute. Okay. Yep. No, I hear you.
Okay.
So our guest today on the Borderless Podcast is Tim Leffel. Right. Award-winning travel writer Tim Leffel originally worked in the music business for RCA Records, but he started traveling and never looked back. He's from Virginia and Tampa, Florida, but has also lived in Turkey, Korea, and Mexico. 3 of the past 5 years in Guanajuato, Mexico. He has been our neighbor, which is about an hour drive from here, something like that, I think. He's author of The World's Cheapest Destinations, Travel Writing 2.0, and Make Your Travel Dollars Worth a Fortune, The Contrarian Traveler's Guide to Getting More for Less. But I think your newest book is called A Better Life for Half the Price, right? That's your
Yes.
Book? Yes. And he's also editor of the web publication Perceptive Travel. Welcome, Tim Leffel, to the Borderless Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's great to be here in person, actually.
Right. What are you doing in San Miguel, Tim?
There's this thing they have every year called the San Miguel Writers Conference, and it's apparently a really big deal among the writers of the world, and they attract a lot of big-name authors here to speak. I'm not one of those that's doing a big keynote, but I am doing. I'm teaching a session on establishing a travel writing platform and actually making some money in that pursuit.
That's great. So not only are you travel writing, you're teaching people how to travel write.
Yes, and hopefully taking them beyond the hobby phase so they can actually get compensated for what they write.
Right.
I was gonna say, do you think that that's something that even still today, after a lot of people have been doing kind of travel blogs for a while and travel writing, do you think that's still a worthwhile pursuit? I mean, is that not kind of a crowded market nowadays?
It's very crowded, but I think the potential is much higher than it used to be just because you can run your own show. And there are a lot of 6-figure bloggers out there now writing about travel. Well, when I say a lot, a couple dozen, but I mean, there were never a lot of 6-figure freelance writers in the magazine days. So I think it has gotten better in the sense that people can have more control over their destiny.
Right. Fantastic. And so now when did you worked in the music business? What did you do? Just fill us in and give us the shorthand on that.
I was a marketing guy trying to make bands famous. And I first worked in Nashville, Tennessee with country artists, and some of them were pretty famous. And then I got transferred up to New York and started doing rock and roll and jazz and hip hop, and so a whole different scene. But it was exciting time. It was when the music business was really flourishing, and it was before the days of Napster came along. And so I think I got out at a good time, actually.
Gotcha. And so how old were you when you got out?
Probably 30, 31, and then we went traveling around the world, and our plan was to take this great year-long trip around the world, which is what many people do, and we decided that was a lot more interesting than working in an office every day. So we came home, saved money for a year, and then took off for another 2 years and taught English some of the time along the way. And then that's when I started travel writing and just kept doing it over the years, and eventually became a full-time job once the internet came along and it was possible to have more of a platform.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, we have introduced you as award-winning writer. You're not kidding. I mean, when you look at some of this guy's, it looks like every year you win multiple awards from pretty impressive. Yeah. So congratulations on that. Great job. Sampling of awards won by Tim Leffel. We've got just last year the Silver Award from the Nacha Awards for The Other Side of the Yucatan. Now, that I assume was an article?
Yeah, I used to have a little beach house in the Yucatan near Mérida, and so spent a lot of time there with my family over the last decade.
Okay, but you've also got something, you won something last year for Meet the New Digital Nomads. What was that about?
That was for Lonely Planet, actually, for their online site. And it was all about the kind of people you talk to, people that have found a way to make a living anywhere in the world, to be location independent. And I intentionally did not interview people there that were making money from blogging. They were people, one guy and his wife own a t-shirt company that's all run virtually. One guy is living in Saigon doing kind of systems analyst stuff. Another one does SEO consulting. So there are a lot of things you can do without being in a physical location.
Right. That's great. One of the things, we do these survey monkeys occasionally, and the last time James put one out there, somebody was really kind of frustrated. They're like, some of the stuff you talk about, I'm not looking to live high on the hog in some of these places. He's saying, where can we live inexpensively, And that is an interest that some people have for a variety of reasons. It could be because they're younger and they just don't have much of an income at this point. It could be because they're retired and they're trying to make their money last longer. But that would appear to be a really strong focus that you have in your books, right?
Yeah, and that's really the whole reason I put out that book, A Better Life for Half the Price, was to kind of show people that it's very easy to cut your expenses in half just by changing your address if you're willing to open up your horizons. And I think there are 24 countries or something like that in the book. I'm not sure exactly. I kind of lost count. But there's probably even more now than when I wrote that, just because the dollar's so strong. That's not going to last forever, but right now there are even more cheap places. But and they're not all in Asia. They're not all in Latin America. There's some in Europe where you can live very reasonably right now for easily half what you would spend living in the U.S. or Canada.
Right. I was just looking at the chapters that you have. You've got so many countries in here. I was happy to see Mexico at the top, and you said something about we're going to take a little more time on Mexico because most of the other countries combined do not have as many expats as does Mexico.
Correct, because it's just so close and easy. Part of the reason I lived here as opposed to somewhere like Thailand or even Chile is it's very easy to get back home. I have older parents and I don't want to be, on the other side of the world if something happens. And that's the thinking of a lot of people, even retired people. They want to be close to their grandkids and not have to be on a 15-hour plane ride to go see them. So Mexico is very appealing to that. For that, and it's also quite inexpensive, and the flight prices are not bad to get back and forth.
Absolutely. I'm looking at the table of contents of your book, just so that people know he did not slap this stuff together. This is a really well-researched book, and so let's just run down the countries: Mexico, Ecuador, Panama, Thailand, Cambodia, Colombia, Vietnam, Argentina, Nicaragua, Honduras, Hungary, Guatemala, India, Bulgaria, Portugal, Malaysia, Nepal, Peru, and you also have other places to consider. So you, I take it, have been to most or all of those places.
I have been to all of those, yes.
Wow.
And I interviewed people that were in some other spots that I didn't give as much ink to, but they are worth considering. Some of the time it was just because of visa restrictions. Like Indonesia would be a great place to live, and a lot of people have found a way to live in Bali, but it's a real pain with the visa situation. You basically have to do all this finagling and workarounds, and you still got to go to Singapore every 6 months at the best. That's the best case scenario. More often, people are leaving every month or two to get their visa renewed.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I'm curious to know. Okay, we just ran down all these different countries that you have, but if you could break it down by city, do you have maybe a top 5 cities that you enjoy right now?
Well, I do kind of make the point in there too. If you're saying half price, that's not necessarily going from rural Iowa to Santiago. You have to kind of go urban to urban or rural to rural to make it an accurate comparison. But I think Buenos Aires is a fantastic city, and so is Mendoza. And some people, live in Bariloche. There's lots of places in Argentina you can live, but there are, big capital fun cities like that, like Buenos Aires and Mexico City and Lisbon, Budapest, where you can, live for a very reasonable price, but have a very urban, fun, cultural kind of life and not have to really be giving up anything.
Right. And so you mentioned a few places there in Argentina. What else? Where else would you?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're into. If you are into living in an urban place, those are great choices. Panama City's quite reasonable. There are, plenty of other capital cities in Europe that are not all that expensive if you go east or, go to the former Balkans, for example. I know you guys have talked a lot about Saigon, about Ho Chi Minh City, Chiang Mai in Thailand, and Bangkok. I mean, to me, though, I'd rather live in a smaller, more manageable place, which is why I'm in Guanajuato. I kind of like that size. I like to walk around and see people I know, and just kind of, I like pedestrian friendly places too, and that's a big part of it for me. But other people, they want to lounge on the beach all day, or they want to live in the mountains. And so actually, on that site where I sell the book directly, I give a few extras if people buy them, and one of them is kind of a flow chart of figuring out, where your ideal place is. And so you can at least eliminate some and, make your choices less daunting. But of course, there's no substitute for actually going there and doing a trial run and, living there in a real neighborhood for a while and figuring out if it's really right for you. Because there are some places that have looked great to me on paper, like Cuenca, Ecuador, for instance. But then when I've gotten there, I've thought, nah, it's not really for me. It's not what I was expecting.
You talk about in the introduction of your book what it was like when you moved from, and I assume you were in Tampa at that time when you moved to Mexico.
I was actually in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, you were in Nashville.
Back there, and that's where my daughter grew up and went to school.
Okay. And you were saying that you had your rent was something like $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And what? So just let's talk about it financially.
That part. Yes, I was in Tampa. At that
you were
point.
in Tampa. At that point.
When I moved back the second time to Mexico, and my rent was $2,000 a month.
Okay, but let's just talk about the financial reality of that. When you moved from there, and did you move to Merida?
No, I moved to Guanajuato.
Guanajuato. Okay. All right. And so, what did you know? What were the differences?
Well, basically, when we live in Guanajuato, that's what we spend on everything. I mean, not travel, but just we own our house there, but we're constantly doing work to it and, renovations and buying furniture. When it was completely empty when we moved in. The first time we lived there, we rented though. So the equation's been about the same. So what we spent on living expenses in Guanajuato completely total is basically what we spend on rent in the USA.
Right.
So that's not even counting health insurance and car insurance and, all the things you have to pay in the US, your expensive cell phone bill and all that. So it just kind of illustrates how much cheaper it can be than Mexico. And this is by far not the cheapest place. I mean, you could move to Nicaragua or Cambodia or something and spend far less.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I noticed too. It just seems like my experience in the United States was, no matter how well I did financially, and, I have to accept some responsibility for this, of course, but no matter how, it was always a struggle to have enough money, as much money as I wanted to save, to put aside. And the difference, I've been here almost 2 years in San Miguel, it's almost the opposite. There's just these I'm like, wow. It was very surprising to me how much money I was saving. Now, the reality is that when you look at things like living expenses, I think compared to Phoenix, Arizona, I'm saving about a third in my typical expenses. It's easy to do that when you look at housing expenses and stuff like that. But when you look at eating out, for instance, how would you compare eating out in Tampa and eating out in central Mexico here?
I think there's no equivalent of how cheap it is to eat street food here. For one thing,
Sure.
If you want to just go out for some tacos or something, it seems so ridiculously cheap. I got a 16-ounce soda this morning. 16-ounce fresh squeezed juice for basically $1. And that's unfathomable. You go to Whole Foods and spend $5 for the same thing. And so, at the very bottom level, it's so much less. And then when you go out to a nice restaurant, I mean, I'm here in San Miguel now, but a few nights ago I went out in Guanajuato to what is really one of the best restaurants in town. And most of the main dishes are like $8 or $10, you know, and that's considered expensive there.
Yes.
That's a nice place. But, that's the price of an Applebee's at home. Something not so good.
Exactly. And so sometimes I've seen a lot of people come visit, and when we go out to restaurants, I mean, this is not Cambodia. You're not going to eat for 30 cents, okay? So sometimes when you look at especially if you're eating at mid-level or nicer places here, and you're like, well, that is less than the United States, but it doesn't blow you away. Now, you can eat and be blown away by how much you're saving, but here's the thing that never happens. I never go out to Cashmere's Wine Bar in Scottsdale anymore, or the City Hall Steakhouse, and drop $150 or $200.
Right.
I would do that once or multiple times a month back in Phoenix. That never happens here, and that figures into that total budget being so much less than it used to be.
And how much do you spend for your dentist?
Oh, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't been to the dentist yet since I've been here.
Well, I'll tell you that the dentists, I mean, you can get a teeth cleaning for what, $30, somewhere around there. And it's just kind of in and out, and you pay cash, no problems at all.
Yeah.
I talk about medical expenses. I mean, I had my eyes fixed for around $500 an eye. So that's about 1/3 the price I would pay in the States. So yeah, those types of procedures it's definitely, much cheaper.
Go ahead.
So we went to a dermatologist, all three of us in my family, and got a head to toe exam just to make sure there's nothing wrong there. And it was, I think, $40 each. And so, it's an hour-long consultation, basically.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
There are a lot of different plans you can get. James had a plan where it was free, his dental care, wasn't it? He just found a cute Mexican girl who was a dentist and dated her for a while, and there were no costs whatsoever.
Yeah. Then I came to Chile, so I don't know.
Right.
I'll be back in San Miguel soon, and we'll see if I still have that plan.
Right.
But how about Guanajuato? We talk a lot about San Miguel de Allende, and Guanajuato is very similar. It's very close. And so, if you don't mind, maybe you could tell people a little bit about that city.
Yes, good idea.
Sure. Well, the people that live there probably would ask that I not talk about it because they don't want any more people moving there. They like it the way it is. But it's
poor babies compared to San Miguel. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
It's really hilly there, which I think keeps down the number of retirees who move there because you got to navigate a lot of stairs. It's kind of built on the sides of hills. And there's not a lot of places to park. And so people that want to drive home and into their garage and get out, that limits your options there quite a bit because most of the city is pedestrian only, at least the center of it, which I really like a lot. I just love being able to get around without a car. And then, of course, as here, if you take a taxi, it's going to cost about $2, these days with the exchange rate. So it's very easy to get around there, very cheap. The climate's pretty much the same, 6,500 feet, so it's pretty nice all year. We've had a little cold snap lately, but not bad. But the main reason I wanted to move there initially, besides the fact I like the look and feel of it and all that, is I really wanted to learn Spanish and use Spanish. And there's not that many expats there. I'd say probably 200 to 400, depending on the time of year. So you really do have to use your Spanish if you're in restaurants and if you're out shopping. And so I knew that would kind of force me to at least get a basic level of confidence going. And that was important to me. So, we like that. And most of the houses there have a view because you're on the sides of these hills. So you've got a panoramic view from most of the homes you would rent or buy there. And that's kind of nice. Okay.
So Guanajuato, what could somebody expect if they wanted to move there? Just to give you an idea, folks, you've seen all of our pictures about San Miguel de Allende. Guanajuato has a very similar feel. It's a colonial town. It's a really elegant, cool place. Some people, it's not nearly as infested with, gringos as San Miguel de Allende is. And some people look at that as a plus. Some might look at it as a minus because here you kind of don't have to use Spanish too much. But what about living expenses there? What could a person, let's say a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment or place, what could they expect to rent that for? What is the range?
I think it's significantly cheaper there just because you don't have as many foreigners, and
Right.
so there's not as much of a market for them. So I've known a lot of people there paying $400 or $500 a month for a whole house, of 2 to 4 bedrooms, and in a decent location and all that. If you move kind of out on the outskirts, I mean, not that far, like you live, maybe a 5-10 minute cab ride, then it can go down more. Those. We paid when we first moved there and we're renting, and the prices haven't really changed much. We paid about $800 a month for 2 separate apartments that were each 2 bedrooms because we wanted a lot of space. And so the second apartment we used for my office and as a guest bedroom when people came to visit. And that was $800 all in, like all the utilities, water, gas, everything, and had this humongous roof deck that we could go hang out on, and that was really nice. And I don't know many people paying more than that unless they're in a Airbnb, vacation rental kind of place. But people that rent long term are generally paying $1,000 or less for sure. And that's even for a huge place.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really happy that you get into Mexico and you talk about some of the less expensive places that there is. I mean, it seems like you've written a whole book on this, and you have many other articles that you've written for some big publications about this. What about Mexico City? We were talking before the interview about Mexico City. I think a lot of Americans, especially, have a bad kind of idea about Mexico City. Maybe they hear about pollution and a lot of people being there, but my experience has been great down there, and I know a lot of people that really enjoy life there. And how I see it is kind of like after living in Madrid and going to Paris and New York and all these big cosmopolitan cities. I find that Mexico City is almost like, it's living in one of those, but at a less expensive rate. I mean, I guess probably Buenos Aires is like that as well. I haven't been, but I do plan on going there. But yeah, I really enjoy Mexico City, and I see that you've written some interesting things about that. I mean, it seems to be really growing a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the problem you run into a lot is people get this image stuck in their mind from 5 or 10 years ago, and it's not just about Mexico City, it's about a whole lot of places. And it was really polluted. And for a while there, it was kind of dangerous. You had that when the first peso devaluation happened. I can't remember when that was exactly, but that's when you heard stories about cab drivers taking people to an ATM and making them take out money. And, that stuff doesn't really happen anymore. First of all, the taxis are a lot better regulated now. But it's a much safer city. It's a much cleaner city. They've moved a lot of the factories to the outskirts. And they have very energy efficient buses now, and they've outlawed those little VW Bug taxis. And so, it's blue skies there a lot of times. I mean, I actually flew a year ago. I flew from LA to Mexico City, and it was a lot worse, the smog hanging over LA than it was hanging over Mexico City. And so, I mean, there is some there, but it's not dangerous for your health the way it was in the old days. And culturally, it's really one of the world's great cities. It's definitely one of the world's best food cities. Whether you're eating at the low end off the street or you're, eating in one of those restaurants that makes the Pellegrino list for the best in the world, you just have a really fantastic range of cuisine there and really inventive and interesting things to eat that really take the best of Mexican culture. And then supposedly has the most museums of any place in the world. And, it's kind of a hard thing to verify, but there are a lot of really great ones. And the Anthropology Museum there is one of the best I've been to anywhere in the world. It just takes the whole history of the Americas all the way through. And it's really a wondrous place.
Yeah, I agree. I remember last time I was there, and I went in the morning to the Anthropology Museum, and there's just so much to see. I think it's just humongous. And I just kept wanting to see more and more, and I was walking through it, and next thing I know, it was like I'd been there for like 6 hours and I hadn't eaten, and I was like, I need to leave. But there's so much more I want to see, and I have, you just can't see it all. So.
And then somebody goes, "Oh, there's a second floor."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like the Folk Art Museum there. It's pretty central near that Alameda Park, and it's all the cool Mexican masks and Day of the Dead stuff, and it's a good place to take kids too. But people that I know that live there just really love it because there's so much to do every weekend, all the time, and so many cultural things going on, and it doesn't feel like it's thronged with tourists either, like a lot of places in Europe do these days, especially in the summer. It still feels like a living, breathing city, even if you're in the part where the most tourists are.
Tell us about this Roma neighborhood. Cecilia keeps wanting to take me there. What's that like?
Well, that's where a lot of the hip and happening restaurants and clubs are. And I guess it's gotten a little more gentrified over the years, but it still feels like the real Mexico. There's still hardware stores and barbershops and everything else. Whereas the Condesa neighborhood next to that has kind of become more upscale over the years and more residential. And it's mostly, service businesses, restaurants and coffee shops and whatever. But Roma still feels a little more funky and gritty and and cool. But it's definitely the place where a lot of the best restaurants and nightlife are now.
Well, Tim, if you like that cultural type of stuff, I don't know, have you been to the Mask Museum in San Miguel de Allende yet?
I've not. I've been to the one in Zacatecas, but I have not been to the one here.
I would definitely recommend doing that. I think you'd really enjoy it. It's crazy inexpensive, and it's very interesting. And this is kind of something good to think about for other people. On the Borderless podcast, this guy there, he enjoyed the masks, the cultural masks from a lot of indigenous people throughout Mexico. He started buying them and putting them in his house. Next thing you know, he had him kind of set them up in his basement, and it's turned into this thing. I'm not sure, over 10 years he's been doing this, and now he basically has a museum in his house as well as a hotel on top. That his house is. He's been building out his house, and now it's a hotel, and then he's got this museum down there. National Geographic has gone there. People come, on a daily basis, and it's really incredible, all the knowledge and interesting masks he has there. He also buys and sells masks. So I always thought that was a good example of how you can turn your love for something or your hobby into an actual business. So I would definitely recommend checking that out.
Sounds great.
Yeah, speaking of, so we talked about anthropology museums, we talked about folk art, James just brought up the Mask Museum we have here in San Miguel de Allende, but your town, the town where you often live, Guanajuato, has some sort of a mummy museum, right? Can you tell us about that? I've never gone and seen that.
It's pretty bizarre. If you ever tell a Mexican you're living in Guanajuato, that's the first thing they want to talk about is the Mummy Museum. It's basically I'm going to try to tell this story in as short a manner as possible. But basically, they would bury people in the cemetery, and then you had to keep paying for it year after year. Your relatives had to pay a tax or whatever, a fee, and it's not a lot, but people would fall on hard times and wouldn't pay it anymore. So basically, they would dig up the bodies and put them in this, in this room, in this crypt or whatever. But there's a lot of minerals in the soil. This was a big mining center in the Spanish colonial days. So basically, the bodies get really well preserved, and to the point where the hair on their arms and all is still there. They're just kind of shriveled up, and so now they're on display in this mummy museum with their names next to them and everything.
That was way too descriptive. You're sick. No, no, I was not aware that was where they came from.
The cemetery is right next to it.
Dug them up. Yeah. Oh, not going to pay? Take this. Oh.
But it's a little frightening. I wouldn't take kids there if they're too young.
I guess so. And
there's a great old movie too, by the way, Santo versus the Mummies. And Santo's this iconic, famous wrestler from the golden age of lucha libre here, and it all takes place in Guanajuato. It's very campy, but it's still worth watching.
So we've talked a lot about Mexico, and thanks for that. I mean, we could talk about that all day, but you also lived in Turkey. Tell us about that. How long were you there, and where did you live, and what was that like?
This was a long time ago, 20 years ago, I think, and I was teaching English there. But I just went back, actually, 2 weeks ago, and it's kind of a timeless city in a lot of ways. A lot of the great attractions there have been around for 1,000 or 2,000 years, and that's what was so fascinating about living there. We would go sightseeing every day off and never ran out of things to do. I think it's another fantastic food city. Istanbul is a great place to eat your way around. It's changed a lot over the years. It's gotten more modern and wealthier, and there's more traffic, and that's happened in a lot of countries around the world. But I still think Istanbul is one of the greatest cities to go as a tourist. It's just a fascinating place, and you really feel like you're in another country there. It feels very exotic, whereas some parts of Europe, you see a Starbucks on every corner and a McDonald's around every corner, and just doesn't feel all that different. But Turkey does, it has its own language and its own characters and everything. So it's an interesting place. And But we lived there teaching English when we were young, which is a great way, I would say, sort of a gateway to living abroad. If you don't have, some kind of online business running or some kind of freelance job you can do, in a location independence manner, but you want to go live somewhere else and make a buck, teaching English is one of the best ways to do it, because you can earn enough money to live on. At least you might not get rich, but you can at least earn enough to live on and sustain yourself, and you get to truly live in another culture and get to understand it through your students. And I think it's a great experience because you also see progress. It's one of those jobs where you actually get some job satisfaction because you're seeing people get better at the language as the weeks go on, and that's kind of gratifying. And we did the same thing in Seoul, Turkey, Seoul, Korea, and we did make real money there. If you teach in Japan or Korea or the Middle East, you can actually sock away some money while you're doing it, not just make enough to live on.
Nice. All right. So what about the cost of living there in Istanbul?
It's still actually quite cheap there, and especially right now because the dollar is very strong. It's 3 Turkish lira to the dollar, and there was a point where it was 1.5. So it's literally, you're better off by twice than you were before. And I actually interviewed someone living there who's a friend of mine, and she's living on $500 a month, not counting when she travels around Europe, but just when she's just hanging out at her place. And so, she's living pretty frugally, but I know other people there that I've met that are living on, $1,000, $1,500 a month and having a really nice life. And so, and that's in Istanbul. If you went to, a smaller town in Turkey, you could obviously live on less.
Right. And you were in Seoul also?
Yes, and that's not such a cheap place to live. And most of the expats there are either in the military or they're teaching English or they're working for some U.S. company that has a base there. And it's not my kind of place weather-wise. It's kind of on par with being in Philadelphia or New York or somewhere. They definitely have a real winter there. But it's a vibrant, fun, exciting city if you want to live in an urban place. And it's very modern and clean, and the subway works well. Subway has announcements in English, too.
Beautiful. All right. Well, Tim, we've talked a lot about some of the places you've been, some of your insights. But in a minute, we want to come back and talk to you a little bit more about your business and how that's going for you. But right now, we need to take just a moment and give some attention to our sponsor. Today's Borderless podcast is brought to you by a newer sponsor, the Church of the Blazing Apocalypse. Yes, our friends at the Church of the Blazing Apocalypse are every bit as devoutly Christ-like as they are committed to the violent annihilation of as many unpatriotic heathen goat squeezers as possible. But that shouldn't concern you. No, that is not if you're right with the Lord. Because although His holy word talked about loving thy neighbor, what it really meant was loving thy wholesome, right-thinking, U.S. military-supporting, poisonous, snake-handling Christian neighbor. Go to thechurchoftheblazing.apocalypse.com now, where you'll note a flash animation loop of people being tortured playing continuously in the background. Today's blog post offers some insightful commentary on how the lizard wizards of Jupiter are probably spiking your whiskey, and how you can protect yourself with gold-plated Jesus on the Cross emblazoned thought-filtering helmets. They're very expensive, but do you or do you not love your children? The Church of the Blazing Apocalypse, feel the love of Jesus and the wrath of our drone strikes. Okay, we're back to the Borderless podcast with our guest this week, the very well-awarded travel writer Tim Leffel. So Tim, all right, you travel a lot. 2016, do you know where are you planning to go? Any hot spots for 2016 planned?
My itinerary often has to do with where I'm going for business reasons, either for a conference or for a writing assignment or something I'm doing for one of my own sites. So it's kind of an oddball mix most of the time. I was just in Turkey. I'm going to Turks and Caicos of all things because I'm doing a magazine article there. And then my next trip after that, I think, is going to be Fiji with my wife. It's our 20-year anniversary, and that's somewhere she always wanted to go. So I cashed in some frequent flyer miles, and we're off to the other side of the world. But I think I may be speaking at a conference that's in Stockholm. I've never been to Scandinavia because if I have to go there and pay out of my own pocket, I'm going to be broke in a hurry.
Oh, yeah.
But I spend a lot of time in Latin America, probably more there than anywhere else because I write a lot about the region, and it's also an easy part of the world to just go and come back and not have any jet lag. And I really like that aspect of being able to hit the ground running and not take a day or two to recover.
Right. And so This is how you make your living. You have, you write books, and some of those books have been very well received. The one that is in its 4th edition right now, what is the title of that?
The World's Cheapest Destinations.
Right. 4th edition right now?
Yes.
When did you first put that up?
2002, I think, the end of 2002. And I started my blog in 2003 just to kind of get the word out about it. And then the blog kind of eventually took off. But yeah, so I've been consistently putting, new editions out as things change. They don't change drastically, but, over time, some countries drift in and some drift out. And there have been some weird ones like Argentina that kind of come in and out depending on what's going on. Sometimes it's cheaper than other times, but that's mostly a travel book. If you're going to go traveling around the world, you don't have a ton of money. Where can you go and really stretch your funds?
Right. And so you have these books, and you have your articles that you post, and you have articles that you write for other magazines. Like, who else have you written for, or do you write for?
I write regularly for Global Traveler magazine. That's why I'm going down to the Turks and Caicos, and that's a magazine for international business travelers. And there's a few blogs I write for regularly, like that aren't mine, like the Viator blog. They're a tour company, and I've done some things for Yahoo and Lonely Planet and others. But most of my income actually comes from sites I run myself, though. I kind of keep doing the freelance thing just because I like to have multiple streams of income. I think that helps you sleep better at night, and I do like seeing my name in print every once in a while instead of pixels. But most of it these days is from sites I run myself, and the advertising that runs next to that, or various kinds of sponsorships.
Oh, I see. So that's most of your, so sites, like what sites? I'm looking at timleffel.com right now.
If you look at the publishing section,
sure.
That will go out to my sites. But I run a narrative site called Perceptive Travel. It's all narrative stories from book authors. The Cheapest Destinations blog I mentioned that actually gets the most traffic. It's been around the longest. That's the main reason. And then I actually run a site that's luxury travel, so I cover both ends of the spectrum, but the luxury one is all about Latin America. And I use my first 2 names for that, Timothy Scott, to keep my Google profile clean. And then I have one site I sold last summer. I know you had Justin from Empire Flippers on here talking about that, but I was feeling like I had a little too much on my plate, so I sold one and got some equity out of it, which is, a good strategy, as he talked about. You build something up over time, and then hopefully eventually, if you don't want to do it anymore, you can sell it to someone else who's ready to take over.
Yeah, Tim, I see that, you, like you said, you've guest posted or written for many other publications. I see Outside Magazine, World Travel. You got Tim Ferriss, Lonely Planet. Perceptive is yours. All kinds on here. And I think that being able to do that, and also you've been on many podcasts, reaching out to other influencers in the market that you're working in is a really great skill. And it seems like you've done that well. What kind of, what tips do you have, or what strategy do you use to reach out to other influencers and get them to allow you to use their platform?
Well, I'm a big fan of conferences and things like that. I think no matter what your niche is, if you can find, the 1 or 2 conferences that everybody in that niche goes to, then that can be a way to really leapfrog, and really make a lot of contacts at once. And there's one for travel bloggers actually called Travel Bloggers Exchange, and they do it on 3 different continents. That's how big it's gotten. They do one in North America, one in Europe, and one in Asia. And I've made some great contacts there. There's a few different organizations that are for travel writers, like Society of American Travel Writers and North American Travel Journalists Association. So if there's an association or a convention like that, whatever subject area you cover, I'm a firm believer in face-to-face. I mean, when you've had a beer with someone or had lunch with them, you're much more likely to, do them a favor, or, do some business together, or, be on each other's podcasts or blogs or whatever the case may be. And so I think when you then put out a book or launch a course or whatever you do online, you've automatically got this network of people that are willing to do you a favor, and you do them a favor later. But hopefully they like your stuff too. They like what you've written and they want to do you a favor. But the point is, if you've got real contacts, that can just help you be so far ahead of everybody else. And then of course, you could do a lot of this online as well, through Facebook groups and message boards, and your social media followers, that kind of thing. And I don't want to discount that. That's hugely important too. And, just to find like-minded individuals, whatever way you can. There's a tribe of you out there. You just need to find where they are.
Do you sell products, Tim?
Besides the books, no, but I have a course that I'm going to launch next month for travel writers called Travel Writing Overdrive. And it's going to be for people that want to just dive in deeper than, I have a book out on that subject and I try to guide people through that, but there's only so much you can do in a book. And so I want to do something more in depth for people that are trying to really raise their profile, make more income from what they're doing. So that will be my first actual online course. We'll see how it goes.
So the site you sold was called Practical Travel Gear.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I launched that, I think 2009, and ran it for 6 years. And it started out as just me, and then eventually I brought on other writers. And so we got to a point where we were able to put up a new review every weekday. And besides it being profitable, the fringe benefit was I've got a closet full of jackets and shoes and everything.
I wanted to do this. This was my idea.
After 6 years, I think I've got enough and I can let it go now. But that was a nice perk as well. But I enjoyed doing it. But I was doing 2 blog posts every week for that, added on to everything else I was doing. It just got to be a lot of work.
Yeah. Got it. And so it was a good thing. You sold it. You made some money on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't sell it because I got tired of doing it. It was the easiest one to sell of everything I run because it was not about me at all. It was about the products. And the new person took over, and the same writers stayed in place besides me. And, the editor, the buyer just replaced me basically and kept it rolling. And I think they're doing okay with it.
I see your other site here is called Hotel Scoop. I'm not sure I understand that yet. What is that?
They're just reviews of different hotels around the world in detail. A lot of hotel reviews you see in magazines or even on TripAdvisor will just be like a few sentences or one paragraph. Mm-hmm. And these are really, 600, 800,000 word reviews that really dive in deep to these hotels. And it's not just me. There's 10 other writers contributing things to this. And I pay them a nominal fee, but a lot of these, they're all professional travel writers, so they're out and about and they're on press trips and whatever, and these are places they're just already staying, and so they're writing about it. It's just another outlet. And
advertising is one good way that you're making money from these sites?
Yeah, for most of these, it's advertising. It's either AdSense or there's direct advertising where someone will buy space to be on that site. Or there's affiliate advertising where if somebody clicks and makes a hotel booking, they don't pay any more, but you as the site owner get a commission from that. And so it's a little bit of different mix of different things. And then sometimes I don't do a whole lot of this, but people will pay for sponsored posts. They'll actually pay you to write about them or put a link in a general article that mentions them. And if I can do that in a way that's not too sleazy, then I will go ahead with it, but only if it's a good match for the audience.
Yeah. Well, Tim, if there's somebody that, they think that they're a pretty good writer and they want to try their hand at maybe doing something like you've done or some of the other people there at the travel conference that you're at there, what do you think is the best way that they can, get started or kind of see if that's something that they would enjoy doing? How could they get started kind of trying their hand at making a living as a writer?
Well, there are 2 general ways. 3. Let's say books are the third. You can be a freelancer and you are basically pitching ideas to editors and hoping that they will say yes. And if they do, they pay you for the article. And the other way is to sort of do it all on your own as a blog or start a resource website or something like that, which, by the way, is a whole lot easier than it used to be. You can now, you can install WordPress with one click on most hosting company sites. You can go find a theme that, fits the kind of layout you want, and you can pay somebody on Fiverr.com or Upwork or something like that to make it look exactly like you want it to look. And, maybe all in, you've spent a couple $100. It's not a big investment these days to start your own site and have it looking really professional. You can, go all out and have something as slick looking as, Yahoo or Condé Nast or whoever else would these days. It doesn't cost much and the tools are there. And there's a lot of plugins on WordPress that will do a lot of the back end work for you that you used to have to do yourself. You used to have to hire a coder to do things, and now it's very easy to kind of just automate that stuff yourself. So if you're a go-getter type, if you're a hustler, then I'd say start your own site and run your own show, because you can keep 100% of it. But if you don't want to keep up with that, if you don't want to do all that, then just write for other people and get paid. And then the third category there is writing books. I mean, it sort of goes in hand with those two, but it can also be independent too. It's also a lot easier to write a book and get it published than it was in the old days. You don't have to go through the gatekeepers and go through a New York publishing house. You can go, through a print-on-demand publisher. You can just go through direct to Amazon if you want. And the tools are all there. It's super cheap. You can find somebody to design the cover for not a lot of money and have it look really professional.
This has been great, huh, James?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think that a lot of people are looking for ways that they can, make a living doing that, or somehow. Obviously, that's one of the main things that people say on the Survey Monkey that we put out. Different places that they can go that are inexpensive, and also how they can make a living while they're in those places. So I think that's what a lot about, Tim. So it's great having these types of conversations.
And let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. So you have certain qualities, traits, or gifts that make you good at this, okay? I'm not just talking about writing, okay? What do people need to create the type of career that you've had in the last 20 years?
One key thing that I'm going to be talking a lot about at this writers conference tomorrow is finding a specialty or a niche. I think that's hugely important, and it's overlooked by a lot of people. You don't want to just go out and start a travel blog or go out and start a parenting blog or whatever the case may be, because that's way too general and there's way too much competition. You need to find a really specific area to write about, either a specific place or a specific kind of travel or kind of parenting or whatever the case may be. I've got, I always trot out these kind of examples because I think they're really illustrative, but there's a site called Autistic Globetrotter, and it's about traveling around the world with your autistic child. I mean, that's pretty narrow, but if you have an autistic child and you want to travel, you're going to find that site sooner or later, and you're going to end up there. This guy I know makes a really pretty good living running this site called Uncovering PA, and it's all about Pennsylvania. And, he's got thousands of articles at this point on his site about Pennsylvania. So if you're planning a trip there, you're probably going to end up on his site sooner or later. And so I think thinking, narrow like that, what place can you cover in depth, or what subject can you cover in depth? And I mean, we're talking about travel here because that's what I do, but you could easily do a product site that's about something very specific. I've heard this one guy on a podcast before. I can't remember his name, but all he does is sell drop ship stuff that has to do with CB radios. I mean, that does not seem like a very lucrative pursuit to me, but apparently he makes six figures doing this, and there are enough people out there buying CB radio accessories to keep him in business. And so if there is something you're passionate about, or you just see a hole in the market, that practical travel gear site I started was really totally because I saw a hole in the market. Everything that was being reviewed was like $6,000 skis and $10,000 bicycles and jackets that cost $800, and I kept thinking, who's buying this stuff? Nobody I know. So I started reviewing $5 little wallets that stuff inside your pants, that hook to your belt, and little flashlights that are also a keychain, and eventually started getting into backpacks and, travel pants and stuff. But the point was they were all things that normal people would buy before they started traveling.
By the way, if you really have a lot of that just laying around, feel free to ship it over to San Miguel here.
Right.
I could use a new jacket.
Another thing I think, other than finding a niche, and also, checking trends to make sure it's kind of a growing niche if you can, and, what if people are spending money in that niche and all this type of stuff. Once you do find that, it seems to me that another key is kind of keeping up with consistent content, whatever it is that you're putting out. You mentioned 2 times a week. How do you usually think about it? If you're starting a site like this, how often should someone think that they need to be putting out regular content, whatever it is?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any easy answer to that. I have some sites that have a review up every weekday, and then my personal blog that I've had the longest, I just generally post twice a week and occasionally miss that. But if you've got a big enough body of work, I think that with evergreen articles, then they're going to keep living on, and it's not so important maybe to put something out real often. But if you're on a real timely subject where it's real news oriented, then you probably need to be posting more often. But some people kind of take the shock and awe approach, and just have a ton of content, like those BuzzFeed kind of sites. They're putting stuff up probably 20, 30 times a day, or tech sites like Mashable. But I think most of us don't need to be that ambitious. If you're specializing in a subject, post as often as it makes sense for that subject, I think.
So, Tim, you had a traditional sort of career. Well, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say traditional. Probably a lot of people think music promoter would be a dream job, I suppose. But there did obviously come a time, and I think you said it was sometime in your early 30s, when you just decided you didn't want that anymore. Was that a tough time? Was it a difficult time? Did you come to some awakenings? Did you decide I want my life to be more what I want it to be? Or what was that like, that transition?
Yeah, and I think you hear this probably a lot from your listeners, that they get fed up with the office politics and the meetings and all the CC emails and all the silly stuff that has nothing to do with the actual work. And I had plenty of that in my company, as you seem to have in almost any company. And a lot of ego stroking goes on and covering your ass and all that stuff. And once I got away from that, I realized how much I disliked it. When you're in the thick of things, you just think you're kind of generally unhappy and you're not really sure why. You're just not feeling fulfilled. And then when I got out there and started traveling, I also realized, there's a whole world out there I'd never seen, because I had my head down in an office all that time. And I felt like I was learning so much more than I did in college. I was absorbing so much more, and just felt more alive. And I also realized over time that I enjoyed writing a lot more than I enjoyed, marketing or sending reports to my boss. And so I started thinking, well, how can I turn this into a real job? And it took me a long time. I was part-time for a long time as a travel writer. And eventually I got to a point where I was making enough that I could stop doing other things. And that's probably an important point to bring up too. Don't just quit your job and say, I'm going to move to Thailand and become a digital nomad. You should probably get going a little bit before you make that leap. Do it on nights and weekends and get going first, and then make the leap. Okay,
now that would be different advice than what some of our guests have. They're a little, I guess they may be responding to all of the people who are constantly talking about it but never doing anything about it. They're like, do it. And I kind of take your approach a little bit more. It's like, if you're going to do it, come up with a plan to do it. Especially, here's the other thing. You've got a wife and a kid, right? How old is your daughter?
15.
Right. That's a whole other subject. A lot of people feel, hey, good for you. But if you've got a kid, it's kind of irresponsible to be traipsing all over the world with them. How do you feel about that?
Well, some people do traipse all over the world and homeschool them and whatever. But I do think kids need a little bit of grounding, We moved, at least for a year, we came for a year the first time, 2 years the second time when we moved to Mexico. And that was enough time for her to establish real friendships and have a routine and, feel like we didn't just go traipsing around the world with her. I think that's a little tough. If you have a baby or even an elementary school kid, it probably doesn't matter so much. But the older they get, the more I think they need some grounding and they need some consistency in their schooling and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, maybe some people need to make the leap because they keep buying courses and buying books and keep listening to podcasts, and then they never actually do anything. And maybe for that kind of person, it has to be all or nothing. But I think for most of us, it's more sensible to start your side hustle on the side, and then eventually it becomes your full-time hustle. But at least you have a sense of whether there's a real market there and whether there's money to be made.
Well, Tim Leffel of timleffel.com and a bunch of other websites and a bunch of books, author of, let us not forget, the new A Better Life for Half the Price. Check that out. You can get it on Kindle. Find it on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, paperback also.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to promote here?
Well, if you go to that site that's my name, timleffel.com, that links out to all my social media accounts and all my websites and books. So that's probably the best landing place. But I'm usually Tim Leffel on social media. It's not a real common name, but somebody snagged it before me on Instagram, so I'm Globetrots on Instagram. But
I see.
It's all linked out from that main portfolio site.
Well, I am so glad that we finally hooked up. I've been trying to catch up with you for some months here, but it just so happens you stopped down in San Miguel, so Nice to meet you, and thanks for being our guest this week on the Borderless podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I have to thank whoever it was who recommended Tim Leffel to me. Forgive me, a lot of you listeners have given me recommendations, and I know one of you did. I'm forgetting who, but Tim was just a great find, and I was really surprised to find that he lives much of the time there in Guanajuato, so close by to us here in San Miguel de Allende. We always ask you to leave ratings and reviews, and if you do leave a review, we are going to read it on the air. And so we just got a new one here, someone who calls him or herself Virgo in C Group. It says, "Hey guys, been listening for 6 months and always forget to leave a review until now. In fact, I've never left a review for any podcast in the past. Jonathan and James, thanks a lot for putting out the podcast so consistently with such great guests. I always learn something new regarding progressive topics I'm interested in, traveling, passports, limits to freedom, and how to overcome, and financial strategies, including your most recent Bitcoin podcast with Roger Ver. I also heard your interview with Simon Black, which was great. I attended Simon's blacksmith camp this year and learned a lot. I've been listening backwards from the latest podcast and finally listened to Jonathan's Journey, episode 10. Thanks for being willing to discuss the cult in a fun and upbeat way." I wonder if this is another ex-Jehovah's Witness. If so, I've been shocked at how many have reached out to me. There have been quite a few of you listeners are like me, former Jehovah's Witnesses. And well, you know, I don't spend a lot of time on that. It is part of my past, and I'm happy to talk to you about it if you'd like to. He goes on to say, I think it's a he, "I was raised in Seattle, Washington, but I've already gotten my Philippines passport since having listened to your show. Now aiming for a Spanish visa and eventually EU citizenship. My cousin in Cebu, Philippines, but from New Orleans originally, can help listeners get retirement visas in a very streamlined process. Let me know if that is of interest. This is pretty much the only podcast I think is worth listening to." Oh, thanks. Thanks, James and Jonathan, as well, for always digging up new info and scouting interesting people. Looking forward to joining the Borderless Society on Facebook and eventually taking a sip or two of mezcal with you both. Very good. You are welcome to come here, lady or gentleman, and I will be happy to share some mezcal with you. So thanks for listening. Leave your review, if you would, and we'll be sure to read it on the air. And as always, another Borderless podcast will be coming up soon.
Thanks for joining us for the Borderless podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders.